Case 1. James Many White Horses, Great Falls, 2008. Great Falls, Montana, 2008. A detective stands in an impound lot on a September afternoon, keys in hand, about to open the trunk of a dusty sedan. The smell hits him before he sees anything. Sweet, rotten, unmistakable. He lifts the lid. Inside, wrapped in a blanket, is the decomposed body of a 2-year-old boy. His name was James Many White Horses, and his mother had been driving around with him in that trunk for over 3 months. Let that sink in for a moment. 3 months. 90 days of highways, gas stations, grocery store parking lots, routine traffic. And in the back of her car, hidden from the world, was the child she was supposed to protect. James Many White Horses was born different. At 2 years old, he was autistic and non-verbal. He couldn't speak, couldn't call for help, couldn't tell anyone what was happening to him. He depended entirely on his mother, Summer Many White Horses, for everything. Food, safety, love. She was his entire world, and she knew that. She knew he had no voice. On May 28, 2008, Summer told people that James had fallen from a high chair. She said he seemed fine at first. Then, overnight, he just stopped breathing. According to her, it was a tragic accident. But here's the thing. She never called 911. No ambulance. No hospital. No attempt to save him. Instead, she wrapped his tiny body in a blanket, carried him out to her car, and placed him in the trunk. Then she closed the lid and went about her life. For weeks, family members asked where James was. "Where's the baby?" they'd say. Summer had an answer every time. "He's with relatives. He's staying with a friend. He's fine, don't worry." And people believed her. Why wouldn't they? He was her son. But while she was telling those lies, she was driving, back and forth across Montana, Great Falls to Browning, Browning to Missoula, Missoula back to Great Falls. Dozens of trips, hundreds of miles, the hot Montana sun beating down on that sedan. And in the trunk, James was decomposing. Every month, his disability check arrived in the mail. Summer cashed it. Every single one. While her son rotted in the back of her car, she was collecting money meant to care for him. Think about that. The state was paying her to keep him alive, and she was spending it while his body decomposed 3 feet behind her driver's seat. How does a mother do that? How do you turn the key, back out of a driveway, feel the weight shift in the trunk, and just keep driving? How do you pump gas, run errands, maybe even give someone a ride, knowing what's back there? How do you sleep at night? On July 21, 2008, Summer was pulled over for driving under the influence. She crashed. Her car was impounded, and still, she said nothing. For weeks, that car sat in the lot. James sat in that trunk, forgotten by the woman who brought him into the world. It wasn't until September 5th, more than 3 months after his death, that a detective finally opened that trunk. The smell told him everything before his eyes could process it. When the medical examiner unwrapped that blanket, what they found was so disturbing it still haunts the case files. Over 100 injuries. Let me say that again. Over 100. Healing skull fractures. Broken bones at different stages of repair. Bruises layered on top of bruises, like sediment in rock. Each one telling the story of a separate beating. Some injuries were old, some were recent. All of them pointed to the same horrifying truth. James. Many White Horses had been tortured for months, maybe even his entire short life. The fall from the high chair? A lie. The overnight death? A lie. The accident story? All of it. A lie. Because of the advanced decomposition, the medical examiner couldn't pinpoint an exact cause of death. But they didn't need to. The accumulated harm spoke for itself. This child had been brutalized repeatedly, systematically, by the one person he trusted most. And when she finally killed him, she didn't mourn. She didn't confess. She didn't even bury him. She just kept driving. In June of 2009, Many White Horses pleaded guilty to negligent homicide and tampering with evidence. The court sentenced her to 40 years for negligent homicide and 15 for tampering, to be served concurrently. That means she could be eligible for parole after serving a substantial portion. Federal prosecutors tacked on an additional 2 years for benefits fraud. Those disability checks she kept cashing. Even after everything, even after the 100 injuries and the 3 months in a trunk, the system couldn't quite bring itself to say she'd never walk free. But here's the thing about freedom. Summer might one day leave a prison cell. James never will. He'll never speak his first word, never run across a playground, never grow up. His entire existence was pain, silence, and a trunk on a Montana highway. Every May, James's name appears in the Disability Memorial. It's a quiet tribute, a line on a page, a reminder of how invisible vulnerable children can become. Autistic, non-verbal, dependent. In the wrong hands, those aren't just descriptions. They're death sentences. Picture those Montana highways, endless stretches of asphalt under big sky, Great Falls to Browning, 120 miles through open prairie, Browning to Missoula, another 200 through mountain passes, stunning views, towns few and far between. It's the kind of landscape that makes you feel free. But for James, those roads were his unmarked grave, mile after mile after mile. Summer, many white horses, is serving her time now. Somewhere behind bars, she eats, sleeps, maybe even thinks about the future. James doesn't get that luxury. He was 2 years old. He trusted her, and she turned his entire life into a nightmare that didn't end even after his heart stopped beating. So when you hear people say, a mother's love is unconditional, remember James' many white horses. Remember the 100 injuries. Remember the trunk. Some people don't deserve the title of mother, and some crimes don't deserve the word negligent. James was the first name on our list today. He won't be the last. Stay with me. Before we go any further, if you're watching because you believe these children deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button right now. Stay with me till the end. Their names, their stories, their stolen futures, they matter. And the only way we honor them is by refusing to look away. Case 2. Tennielle Big Day, Crow Reservation, 2012. December 3rd, 2012. Early morning on the Crow Reservation in Montana. A pickup truck barrels down Highway 313 at nearly 50 miles per hour. Inside the cab, 25-year-old Mary Agnes Leider sits behind the wheel. Her brother's beside her. They've been drinking all night. A quart of gin, dozens of beers. The kind of binge that doesn't just blur the edges, it erases them completely. In that same cab, unbuckled and unprotected, is Leider's 3-year-old daughter, Tennielle Big Day. She's small, vulnerable, completely at the mercy of the adults around her. And at some point during that drive, as the sun starts to rise over the frozen Montana landscape, her mother makes a decision. Mary Agnes Leider reaches over, opens the passenger door, and hurls her daughter out of the moving truck onto the pavement below. 45 miles per hour. A 3-year-old body. Asphalt. You don't need a medical degree to know how that ends. When deputies arrived on scene after fragmented 911 calls started coming in, they found a chaotic mess of stories. It was a hit and run, someone said. She fell out, another claimed. We don't know what happened. But the truck was right there. The driver was right there. And the little girl was already gone. Her skull shattered from blunt force trauma, consistent with being ejected from a moving vehicle at high speed. The deputies pressed for answers. The story kept shifting. But one thing couldn't be hidden. Hours after Tennielle was thrown from that truck, Mary Agnes Leider submitted to a blood test. Her blood alcohol concentration measured 0.24. That's 3 times the legal driving limit. In the middle of the morning, after a night of drinking that never stopped, she wasn't just drunk, she was obliterated. And in that state, she opened a door and threw her daughter onto a highway. Let me be clear about something. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice made in a bottle. The Crow Reservation sits in southeastern Montana, a sprawling stretch of land marked by poverty, isolation, and generational trauma that runs deeper than the Bighorn River. Alcohol isn't just a problem there. It's woven into the fabric of survival for too many families. It's how people cope with loss, with systemic neglect, with the weight of history pressing down on their shoulders. And for some, it becomes so normalized that even the presence of a child doesn't stop the drinking. Tennielle had been living with her grandparents before returning to her mother's care. Those grandparents tried. They gave her stability, structure, a chance. But at some point, she went back to Mary Agnes Leider, back into a world where a quart of gin and dozens of beers on a weeknight was just another Tuesday. Back into a home where a 3-year-old could end up in a truck with drunk adults and no seatbelt at dawn. When you grow up in a place where substance abuse is normalized, where everyone around you drinks to drown their pain, it stops feeling like a choice. It starts feeling like inevitability. But here's the thing, it's not. Every time Mary Agnes Leider lifted a bottle that night, she made a choice. Every time she got behind the wheel with her daughter in the cab, she made a choice. And when she opened that door and pushed Tennielle out into the cold morning air, she made the final, unforgivable choice. Because the Crow Reservation falls under federal jurisdiction, this case didn't go through Montana state courts. The United States Attorney's Office took the lead. Federal prosecutors don't mess around. There's no parole in the federal system. You serve your time, almost all of it, and when you get out, you're on supervised release for years. The feds came in, built their case, and in July of 2013, Mary Agnes Leider pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. On October 22, 2013, she was sentenced to 262 months in federal prison. That's nearly 22 years. After that, 5 more years of supervised release, no parole, no early out for good behavior. She'll serve almost every single day of that sentence, and when she finally walks free, Tennielle will still be dead. But even 22 years doesn't feel like justice when you think about what Tennielle lost. She was 3 years old. She should have been learning her colors, playing with toys, maybe starting preschool. She should have had birthdays and holidays and scraped knees and bedtime stories. She should have had a life. Instead, she got a night of gin, a dawn ride in a truck with no seatbelt, and a mother who decided she was disposable. The Crow Reservation isn't unique in its struggles. Across Indian country, substance abuse is an epidemic. The rates of alcohol-related deaths are staggering. The trauma is multi-generational: boarding schools, forced assimilation, broken treaties, systemic poverty. It's a wound that never healed, and alcohol is the infection that keeps it festering. But acknowledging that context doesn't excuse what happened to Tennielle. It explains it. An explanation without accountability is just another way of saying it'll happen again. When a community's pain becomes a child's death sentence, something is broken beyond repair. Not beyond fixing, beyond repair without serious, sustained intervention. Mobile crisis teams. Substance abuse treatment that's accessible and culturally informed. Family support systems that don't rely on overwhelmed grandparents. Child welfare checks that actually happen, consistently, even in remote areas. These things cost money. They take effort, but they save lives. Tennielle Big didn't die because her mother was a monster. She died because her mother was drunk, broken, and living in a place where both of those things were too common to shock anyone until it was too late. She died because a night of drinking turned into a dawn of horror, and no one stopped it before the door opened. Highway 313 is still there. Cars and trucks still drive it every day. The spot where Tennielle hit the pavement probably looks like every other stretch of Montana asphalt. Unremarkable, weathered, vast. But if you know the story, that highway becomes a grave marker. A reminder that some roads don't lead anywhere good, especially when the person behind the wheel has had a quart of gin and dozens of beers. Mary Agnes Leider is in federal prison right now. She's got years left on her sentence. Maybe she's sober. Maybe she's thought about what she did. Maybe she's found some kind of remorse. But none of that brings Tennielle back. None of that erases the image of a 3-year-old being thrown from a truck at 45 miles per hour. None of that makes it okay. Tennielle Big 3 years old, gone because the bottle mattered more than she did. And 22 years in federal prison still doesn't feel like enough. Case 3. Rosanna Fox, Billings, 2012. Billings, Montana. June 4, 2012. A mother walks into a medical clinic carrying her 3-month-old daughter. The baby is limp, unresponsive. Her tiny body hangs in her mother's arms like a doll that's been dropped too many times. The nurses take one look and know something is terribly, terribly wrong. Rosanna Fox, 3 months old. She should have been cooing, tracking faces with her eyes, maybe starting to smile. Instead, she was dying. The doctors worked fast. They checked vitals, ran tests, examined every inch of her. What they found made their blood run cold. Severe dehydration, patterned bruising across her fragile body, marks that didn't come from a fall or an accident, and a healing skull fracture. Not fresh, healing, which meant it had happened days, maybe weeks earlier, and no one had brought her in for help. The medical staff asked questions, lots of them. Amanda Rose Steffen, Rosanna's mother, and Jeffrey James Fox, her father, stood there and offered nothing coherent. No clear explanation, no timeline, no confession, just vague, contradictory statements that didn't add up. The doctors documented everything, took photos, filed reports. Law enforcement got involved. Detectives interviewed both parents, and they hit a wall. Without a confession, without a clear timeline, without someone pointing a finger and saying, "This is what happened," the case stalled. Prosecutors knew something horrific had occurred behind the closed doors of that Billings apartment, but they couldn't prove who did it or when. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough. So the case sat, and sat, for nearly 2 years. Rosanna Fox's death remained an open wound in the files, unsolved, unanswered. And then, on April 18, 2014, almost 2 full years later, Amanda Rose Steffen walked into a Sonoma County Sheriff's Office in California and said the words that would finally crack the case wide open. "I need to confess." What haunts a mother so deeply that she walks into a police station nearly 2 years later and confesses to killing her infant daughter? What kind of guilt? What kind of unraveling? What kind of psychological torment drags the truth out of someone after that much silence? Amanda didn't just confess. She gave them everything. In vivid, horrifying detail, she told investigators exactly what she had done to Rosanna. She slapped her when she cried, shook her when she wouldn't stop, tried to smother her to silence her, left her strapped in a car seat for hours at a time, alone, neglected, helpless. And then, days before Rosanna's death, Amanda punched her 3-month-old daughter in the forehead, a closed fist, a baby's skull, one final, fatal act of violence. Every single injury the doctors had documented back in 2012 matched Amanda's confession. The patterned bruising, the skull fracture, the dehydration from being left in a car seat without food or water. It all lined up, piece by piece, like a puzzle that had been waiting 2 years to be solved. The medical findings had been locked up in case files, untouched, and now Amanda was handing investigators the key. The case moved forward. Amanda was extradited back to Montana to face trial in Yellowstone County. But this wasn't a straightforward murder prosecution, because Amanda Rose Steffen wasn't just a killer. She was severely mentally ill. Psychologists evaluated her. The findings were clear. Amanda had been suffering from untreated psychosis during the months leading up to Rosanna's death. Postpartum depression, paranoia, delusions, new motherhood had collided head-on with a mind that was fracturing, and no one had intervened. No one had noticed. Or if they had, they hadn't done anything about it. Behind the thin walls of that Billings apartment, a baby was being tortured by a mother whose brain was betraying her, and no neighbor, no family member, no system caught it in time. The jury found Amanda guilty, but mentally ill. That distinction matters. It meant she wasn't going to a standard prison. Instead, she was committed to the Montana State Hospital for 40 years. A psychiatric facility, not a cell block. She'd be eligible for parole after about a decade if, and only if, she stabilized. if her mental health improved, if the doctors deemed her no longer a danger. But here's the thing about a verdict like that. It raises uncomfortable questions. If Amanda was psychotic, if her mind was broken, if she genuinely couldn't distinguish reality from delusion, then how much of what happened to Rosanna was preventable? Could treatment have saved both of them? Could a mental health intervention have stopped a 3-month-old from being punched in the skull? We'll never know, because the system doesn't catch mothers like Amanda until after the damage is done. Jeffrey James Fox, Rosanna's father, didn't get off easy either. He was charged with negligent homicide for failure to protect. He lived in that apartment. He saw the bruises. He knew something was wrong. And he did nothing. In the eyes of the law, his silence made him complicit. Jeffrey pleaded guilty. As a persistent felony offender, meaning he had prior convictions on his record, the court handed him 20 years with 10 suspended. He'd serve a decade, then spend the rest on probation. Not as long as Amanda, but long enough to know he failed his daughter when she needed him most. Think about Rosanna's short life. 3 months, 90 days. Most of them spent in pain, in fear, in the hands of a mother whose mind was unraveling and a father who turned away. She never got to crawl, never got to say a word, never got to experience safety. Her entire existence was violence, neglect, and silence. Untreated mental illness and new motherhood is a dangerous combination. Postpartum psychosis affects a small percentage of mothers, but when it hits, it can be catastrophic. Women experience hallucinations, delusions, paranoia. Some hear voices telling them to harm their children. Some believe their babies are possessed or evil, and without immediate, intensive intervention, the results can be fatal. But here's the problem: we don't talk about it. We don't screen for it consistently. We don't make mental health care accessible or affordable for new mothers, especially in places like Montana, where resources are stretched thin and distances are vast. We tell women to enjoy every moment and cherish this time. And when they're drowning in psychosis or depression, they stay silent because admitting you're struggling feels like admitting you're a bad mother. Amanda Rose Steffen was a bad mother, but she was also a sick mother, and the system failed to catch either reality until Rosanna was already dead. Billings is Montana's largest city, but it still carries that small-town isolation. Apartment complexes where neighbors keep to themselves, thin walls that carry sound but not concern. It's easy to hide in a place like that. Easy to slip through the cracks, easy to hurt someone in private and have no one notice until it's too late. Amanda is in the Montana State Hospital now. Medication, therapy, supervision, all the things she needed 2 years earlier but didn't get. Jeffrey served his time and walked out. A decade older, his daughter still gone. And Rosanna Fox is a name in a case file. A 3-month-old who never stood a chance. What haunts Amanda so deeply she confessed 2 years later? Maybe guilt. Maybe the psychosis lifted and she finally saw clearly what she'd done. Maybe the weight of knowing became unbearable. Or maybe, in some twisted way, confessing was the only way she could make Rosanna's death mean something. But it doesn't. Because Rosanna didn't need a confession. She needed protection, and no one gave it to her. Case 4. Caleb Hopkins, Glendive, 2018. Glendive, Montana. June 25, 2018. Eastern Montana, in the dead of summer, is unforgiving. The kind of heat that shimmers off asphalt, that turns car interiors into ovens, that makes you think twice before touching a steering wheel with bare hands. On this particular day, the temperature climbed above 90 degrees. A 19-year-old Ashley Maria Howard decided it was a good day to go to a party. She drove to a friend's house. Music, laughter, people hanging out. The kind of gathering that stretches from afternoon into evening and then keeps going. Ashley walked inside, ready to forget about responsibilities for a while. But she left something behind in that parked car, windows rolled up tight. Her 2-year-old son, Caleb, inside a vehicle. When it's 90 degrees outside, the temperature doesn't just rise, it skyrockets. Within an hour, the interior can hit 120 degrees or more. The air becomes thick, suffocating. lethal. For a toddler trapped inside, it's not a matter of if they'll die. It's a matter of when. The party went on, hour after hour. Ashley didn't check on Caleb, didn't crack a window, didn't bring him inside. She just left him there, strapped in, helpless, baking in a metal box under the Montana sun while she laughed and socialized a few feet away. By the time someone finally thought to check on him, Caleb's body temperature had reached 107 degrees. That's not a fever, that's organ failure, that's brain damage, that's death knocking on the door. They rushed him to the hospital, but the damage was done. 2 days later, in Billings, Caleb Hopkins died. And here's where this case goes from tragic to unforgivable. This wasn't the first time. Caleb had been left in a hot car before. Not once. Not twice. 3 times. 3 separate occasions where Caleb's grandfather had found his grandson sweating, crying, trapped inside a vehicle while Ashley was nowhere to be found. 3 times the grandfather pulled that little boy out, held him, cooled him down, and then looked his daughter in the eye and told her the truth. This will kill him. 4 words. Clear, direct, undeniable. Not, this is dangerous. Not, you should be more careful. This will kill him. And Ashley Howard heard those words, acknowledged them, then went right back to doing the exact same thing. So when June 25th rolled around and Caleb was left in that car again, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tired mom who forgot her kid was in the back seat on the way to work. This wasn't a tragic lapse in memory. This was the 4th time. This was deliberate. Repeated. Warned neglect. Caleb's grandfather had drawn the line in the sand. He'd told Ashley exactly what would happen, and she did it anyway. Most hot car deaths happen because of routine disruption. A parent who usually doesn't do the daycare drop-off. A change in schedule. A moment of distraction. The brain goes on autopilot, and a child is forgotten. Those cases are heartbreaking, devastating, but they're not intentional. They're accidents in the truest sense of the word. This was not that. Ashley Howard knew the risk. She'd been warned, explicitly, by someone who loved Caleb, someone who had already saved him 3 times. She knew what leaving him in a hot car could do, and she did it anyway. That's not forgetfulness. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. The case went to trial, but the pre-trial publicity in Glendive was so intense that the proceedings were moved to Great Falls. Everyone in that small eastern Montana town knew what had happened. Everyone had an opinion. A fair trial required distance, a jury pool that hadn't already made up their minds. So they packed up the case and drove it north. In August of 2020, after hearing the evidence, the body temperature, the timeline, the 3 prior incidents, the grandfather's warnings, the jury convicted Ashley Maria Howard of negligent homicide. The word negligent feels insufficient when you know the full story, but that's what the law called it. Negligent. As if she simply didn't pay enough attention. As if this was an oversight. Judge Elizabeth Best handed down the sentence. 20 years, with 5 suspended. That meant 15 years behind bars, and Ashley would not be eligible for parole for the first 10. The court credited her with 798 days already served, time spent in jail awaiting trial. But even with credit, even with the possibility of parole after a decade, the math doesn't add up to justice. Because Caleb doesn't get parole. Caleb doesn't get a second chance. Caleb had survived 3 times. 3 close calls. 3 moments where his grandfather's intervention stood between him and death. He beat the odds over and over. But odds aren't infinite. Eventually, luck runs out. Eventually, the warnings go unheeded one too many times. And on June 25th, 2018, in a parked car in Glendive, Caleb Hopkins ran out of chances. Picture Glendive in the summer. A small town on the Yellowstone River, population fewer than 5,000. Wide streets, low buildings, endless sky. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where news travels fast, where a child's death doesn't just make headlines, it shatters the community. People in Glendive knew Caleb, they knew his grandfather, and they knew Ashley. This wasn't a distant tragedy. It was personal. Picture the interior of that car. Vinyl seats turned scorching. Dashboard too hot to touch. Air so thick it feels solid. A 2-year-old strapped into a car seat, unable to escape, unable to understand why he's been left, crying until his throat is raw, sweating until there's no moisture left, his small body shutting down system by system. And just beyond the windows, through the glass, voices and laughter, people having a good time while he dies alone. That's what Caleb's last hours looked like. That's what his mother chose. The grandfather's warning echoes through this case like a ghost. This will kill him. He knew. He tried to stop it. But you can't save someone from their own mother if the system doesn't step in. And the system didn't. Not after the first time. Not after the second. Not after the third. It took Caleb's death for anyone official to take action. By then, it was too late. Ashley Howard is in prison now, serving her sentence somewhere in the Montana correctional system. She's got years left before she'll even see a parole board. Caleb, meanwhile, is in a grave. 2 years old. Survived 3 near-death experiences, only to lose on the 4th. If you've ever left your child in a car while you just ran inside for a second, take this as your wake-up call. Even a minute is too long. Even cracked windows don't help enough. Even if you think you'll be fast, don't do it. Because the difference between almost and fatal is measured in minutes, and you don't get to rewind the clock. But this case isn't about a moment of poor judgment. It's about a pattern of neglect that everyone saw coming and no one stopped. It's about a grandfather who did everything right, saved his grandson 3 times, issued the clearest possible warning, and still lost him because someone else refused to listen. Caleb had survived 3 times. 3 miracles. 3 escapes. He used up all his luck before he turned 3 years old, and on the 4th time, in the summer heat of Glendive, there was no one left to save him. He didn't get a 4th chance. Case 5. Ezekiel Contreras, Great Falls, 2023. Great Falls, Montana. April 21st, 2023. Police officers respond to a 911 call and arrive at a residence to find a scene that will haunt them for the rest of their careers. 20-year-old Whisper Rain Hawkbear is on the floor, cradling her 2-month-old son, Ezekiel. He's bleeding, unresponsive, barely clinging to life. Nearby, her 16-month-old daughter is also injured, crying, traumatized. The officers ask what happened. And Hawkbear, in a voice that's somehow both detached and frantic, tells them the truth. She had thrown Ezekiel against a wall. Repeatedly. She had stomped on his skull. She had struck him with pieces of a playpen. Over and over. For hours. 2 months old. 8 weeks of life. And his own mother had spent hours, not minutes, hours, beating him to death. The violence hadn't been limited to Ezekiel. Hawkbear had also slammed her 16-month-old daughter into a mirror, into a wall, leaving her bruised and terrified but alive. 2 children, 2 targets. 1 woman in the grip of something so dark, so frenzied, that she couldn't stop even when their tiny bodies went limp in her hands. Ezekiel was rushed to the hospital. The doctors did everything they could, but when you stomp on a 2-month-old skull, when you throw an infant against a wall hard enough to cause blunt force trauma, when you beat a baby for hours, there's a limit to what medicine can fix. 2 days later, Ezekiel died. Cause of death, fatal blunt force injuries, inflicted by his mother. But here's the part that makes this case so much worse. Here's the part that exposes the system's deadly failures. 2 days before Ezekiel's murder, 2 days, his father, who was out of state, called for a welfare check. He was worried. He told authorities that Hawkbear was using drugs, that the conditions weren't safe, that his children were in danger. Dispatch records confirm the request came in. A concerned father, miles away, begging someone to check on his kids. And no one did. No patrol report shows follow-through. No officer knocked on that door. No social worker made a visit. The call came in, got logged, and then nothing. For 2 days, Ezekiel and his sister stayed in that house with a mother spiraling out of control. For 2 days, they had no protection. And on April 21st, Ezekiel paid for that system failure with his life. How many children die because a call goes unanswered? How many desperate pleas from parents, neighbors, teachers, relatives get logged into a system and then buried under paperwork, short staffing, miscommunication? How many welfare checks never happen because someone assumed it wasn't urgent, or forgot, or didn't have the resources? Ezekiel's father did everything right. He saw the danger. He called for help, and the system let him down. Let Ezekiel down. Let that 16-month-old little girl down. When Hawkbear called 911 herself in the early morning hours of April 21st, her words were chilling in their clarity. I think I killed my kids. Not, there's been an accident. Not, I need help. I think I killed my kids. She knew what she had done. She knew Ezekiel was dying. She knew her daughter was hurt. And she said it out loud, calm enough to form the sentence, detached enough to use the word think, as if there was any doubt. The investigation moved quickly. The injuries were undeniable. The confession was on tape. Hawkbear didn't try to claim it was an accident or that someone else had done it. The evidence was overwhelming. Autopsy results, the daughter's injuries, the 911 recording, the timeline. This wasn't a case that required months of detective work. It was open and shut from the moment officers arrived. But the legal process took time. Competency evaluations, mental health assessments, pre-trial motions. Ezekiel died in April of 2023, and it wasn't until March of 2025, nearly 2 years later, that Whisper Rain Hawkbear stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty to deliberate homicide. The charge related to her daughter's assault was dropped, likely as part of the plea agreement. She admitted to killing Ezekiel. The court accepted her plea. In June of 2025, the judge handed down the sentence. 100 years in prison. No time suspended. She would be required to serve a minimum of 30 years before even being considered for parole. 30 years. That means Hawkbear will be at least 50 years old before she has any chance of walking free. And given the severity of the crime, given that she murdered her own infant son, parole is far from guaranteed. She could very well spend the rest of her life behind bars. 100 years. It sounds like justice. It sounds like accountability. But it doesn't bring Ezekiel back. It doesn't erase the hours of violence he endured. It doesn't undo the trauma his sister will carry for the rest of her life. Because she survived. The 16-month-old little girl lived. But survival isn't the same as being okay. She has physical scars, bruises that healed, maybe fractures that mended. But the emotional and psychological scars, those don't heal the same way. She's old enough now to be in preschool, maybe kindergarten. Old enough to have memories, even if they're fragmented and terrifying. Old enough to know that something terrible happened, even if she can't fully articulate it. She'll grow up knowing her mother killed her baby brother and hurt her too. That's a burden no child should carry. The welfare check that never happened sits at the center of this tragedy like a black hole. If an officer had shown up on April 19th or 20th, if someone had knocked on that door and assessed the situation, would Ezekiel still be alive? Maybe. Maybe Hawkbear would have hidden the drug use, played it cool, sent the officer away satisfied. Or maybe the officer would have seen something: erratic behavior, unsafe conditions, signs of impairment, and called Child Protective Services. Maybe those kids would have been removed, placed in emergency foster care, kept away from their mother until she could prove she was stable. We'll never know. Because the check never happened. Great Falls isn't a tiny town. It's got a population of around 60,000, a police department, resources. This wasn't some remote cabin hours away from the nearest officer. This was an urban setting, where response times are measured in minutes, not hours. There's no excuse rooted in geography or isolation. The failure here was procedural, systemic. A call came in. It should have been followed up on. It wasn't. And 2 days later, Ezekiel Contreras was dead. Think about the father, wherever he is now. He did everything a parent in his position could do. He wasn't there physically, but he was paying attention. He saw the red flags. He made the call. He trusted that the system would do its job. And then he got the call every parent dreads, the one that tells you your child is gone. The guilt he must carry, even though none of this was his fault, must be unbearable. He tried to save his son. The system failed both of them. Whisper Rain Hawkbear is in a Montana prison cell right now, serving the first years of a century-long sentence. She'll eat, sleep, age. She'll see the sun through barred windows, and maybe, decades from now, face a parole board that will decide if she's ever safe to release. Ezekiel, meanwhile, never got to see his first smile reflected back at him. Never got to taste solid food. Never got to crawl, or walk, or say a single word. His entire existence was 8 weeks long, and too many of his final hours were spent in unimaginable pain. His sister carries the scars. Physical ones that might fade. Emotional ones that won't. She's alive, but at what cost? She survived her mother's violence, but she lost her brother, lost any sense of safety a toddler should feel, lost the childhood she deserved. She'll need therapy, support, years of healing. And even then, some wounds never fully close. How many calls for welfare checks go unanswered every year? How many children are one missed visit away from becoming a statistic? The system is overwhelmed. Underfunded social services, overworked officers, too many cases, and not enough hands. But when a father calls from out of state and says his kids are in danger, that should trigger an automatic, immediate response. No delays. No assumptions that it can wait. Just action. Ezekiel Contreras didn't get that. He got 2 days of silence. And then he got hours of violence that ended his life before it ever really began. 100 years for Hawkbear. 30 minimum before parole. It's a long sentence. But it's not long enough to make this right. Because nothing is. If this case is shaking you, good. That means you're human. That means you understand the stakes. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button right now. Because we're only halfway through this documentary, and every single one of these children deserves to have their story heard. Don't look away. Stay till the end. Case 6. Kenzley Olson, Fort Peck Reservation, 2016. Fort Peck Reservation, northeastern Montana, April of 2016. 13-month-old Kenzley Olson should have been safe. Her mother was incarcerated, unable to care for her, so the family made what seemed like a responsible decision. Place Kenzley with her aunt, Janelle Red Dog. Family placement. Familiar faces. A chance to stay connected to her roots while her mother served her time. It should have been a lifeline. Instead, it became a death sentence. On April 18, 2016, Janelle Red Dog beat Kenzley to death, blunt force trauma to the head. A 13-month-old child, barely walking, just starting to form words, completely dependent on the adults around her, beaten so badly her small body couldn't survive it. And when Kenzley stopped moving, when it became clear what had happened, Red Dog didn't call for help, didn't try to save her, didn't confess. She used methamphetamine. Then she stuffed Kenzley's body into a blue duffel bag, zipped it shut, and threw it in a dumpster like garbage. And then, here's where it gets even darker. Janelle Red Dog reported Kenzley missing. She called authorities and said her niece was gone, vanished, possibly abducted. The kind of call that triggers an immediate, all-hands-on-deck response. Within hours, an Amber Alert blasted across Montana and into neighboring states. Kenzley's face appeared on highway signs, news broadcasts, social media feeds. Every law enforcement agency in the region mobilized. Volunteers organized search parties. The Fort Peck community came together, desperate to find a missing toddler before it was too late. People scoured fields, checked abandoned buildings, knocked on doors. Tips poured in. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone believed a little girl had been taken, that somewhere out there she was scared and alone and waiting to be rescued. The urgency was real. The fear was real. The hope was real. But Kenzley wasn't missing. She was already dead, stuffed in a duffel bag, thrown away by the woman who was supposed to protect her. While Montana searched for Kenzley, she was already gone, hidden by the one person who should have protected her. Detectives zeroed in on Janelle Red Dog quickly. When a child goes missing, investigators always start with the last person who saw them. They asked questions, took statements, pressed for details, and Red Dog's story didn't hold up. Inconsistencies, gaps, timelines that didn't match. The more she talked, the more it unraveled. Under interrogation, the truth finally came out. She confessed. Not because she wanted to, but because the walls were closing in and the lie was too big to maintain. She admitted what she had done to Kenzley. She admitted using meth, and then she led police to the dumpster where she had discarded the body. Officers found the blue duffel bag. Inside, Kenzley Olson, 13 months old. Her whole life ahead of her, cut short by someone who was supposed to be family, supposed to be safe. The autopsy confirmed blunt force head trauma as the cause of death. The medical examiner documented injuries consistent with being beaten. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a fall or a tragic mishap. This was violence, deliberate and fatal, inflicted by an adult on a toddler who had no way to defend herself. Because the crime occurred on the Fort Peck Reservation, federal authorities took over the case under the Major Crimes Act. Tribal lands fall under federal jurisdiction for serious felonies, which means cases like this don't go through Montana state courts, they go federal. And the federal system doesn't mess around. There's no parole in federal prison. You serve your time, nearly all of it, and when you get out, it's under strict supervised release. In July of 2017, Janelle Red Dog stood in federal court and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. She didn't fight it. She didn't go to trial. She admitted her guilt, and the court sentenced her to 20 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. She'll serve close to the full 2 decades behind bars. And when she's finally released, she'll be older, marked forever as the woman who killed her niece and then lied about it while an entire region searched. 20 years. It sounds significant, but stack it against Kenzley's 13 months of life, and the math doesn't balance. Kenzley will never turn 2, never go to school, never have a birthday party, or learn to ride a bike, or grow up. Red Dog will eventually walk free. Kenzley never will. Methamphetamine use is an epidemic across parts of rural Montana, especially on reservations where poverty, trauma, and lack of access to treatment create the perfect conditions for addiction to take root and spread. Meth doesn't just impair judgment. It distorts reality, fuels paranoia, strips away empathy. People on meth do things they wouldn't otherwise do, make decisions that seem incomprehensible to a sober mind. But impairment isn't an excuse, it's an explanation. And in Kenzley's case, it's part of the reason she's dead. Red Dog was using meth when she killed Kenzley. Was using it when she stuffed the body in a bag. Was using it when she decided to lie and say her niece had been abducted. The drug didn't make her a killer, but it sure as hell made her capable of doing what she did without immediate remorse, without the clarity to stop and think, what have I done? The false abduction report is what makes this case especially cruel. Red Dog didn't just kill Kenzley, she weaponized the community's love and concern. She watched people search, watched volunteers comb through the reservation looking for a child she knew was already dead. Watched resources pour into a manhunt for a kidnapper who didn't exist. She let hope linger when there was none. That's not just murder. That's psychological torture inflicted on an entire community. Fort Peck Reservation sits in the vast plains of northeastern Montana, near the North Dakota border. It's remote, sprawling, beautiful in its own harsh way. But it's also a place where systemic issues, poverty, unemployment, inadequate healthcare, substance abuse, create an environment where tragedies like this happen more often than they should. Kenzley's mother was incarcerated. Red Dog was using meth. The family was doing its best to hold things together, and it still wasn't enough. When Kenzley was placed with her aunt, it probably felt like the right choice. Keep her in the family. Keep her connected to her culture, her people, her roots. Foster care can be traumatic, especially for Native children who have historically been removed from their communities and placed in non-Native homes. So the family tried to take care of their own. And it should have worked. In most cases, it does work. But in this case, it ended in a dumpster. The Amber Alert that went out for Kenzley mobilized an entire region. People who didn't know her, who had never met her family, dropped everything to help search. That's the power of community. That's what happens when people believe a child is in danger. But it's also what makes Red Dog's lies so unforgivable. She exploited that goodness. She let people exhaust themselves searching for a little girl she had already killed. Janelle Red Dog is in a federal prison somewhere, serving her 20-year sentence. She's got years left before she'll see freedom again. Maybe she's sober now. Maybe she's thought about what she did. Maybe she's faced the reality that she beat her 13-month-old niece to death, threw her away, and then lied about it. Or maybe she's still making excuses, still telling herself the meth made her do it, still refusing to own the full weight of her actions. Kenzley's mother was in prison when her daughter died. She couldn't protect her, couldn't be there. She trusted her sister to keep Kenzley safe, and that trust was betrayed in the worst possible way. The guilt she must carry, even though none of this was her fault, must be crushing. She lost her freedom, and then she lost her daughter. No parent should have to endure that. The blue duffel bag is an image that sticks, small enough to hold a toddler's body, zipped shut, discarded. Kenzley Olson reduced to trash in a dumpster, while search parties combed the prairie looking for her. That's what methamphetamine and violence and lies look like when they collide. That's what happens when the person who should protect you becomes the person who destroys you. Kenzley Olson, 13 months old, placed with family, beaten to death, hidden, lied about, and finally, 2 decades of federal prison for the aunt who took everything from her. It's not enough. It never is. But it's all the justice system had to offer. And somewhere in Montana, there's still a blue duffel bag in an evidence locker. A silent witness to how badly we failed a little girl who deserved so much better. Case 7. Namaus and Evelyn Sandberg, Missoula, 2021. Missoula, Montana, late 2020. Leannah Jean Gardipe sat across from mental health providers and said the words that should have changed everything. I'm afraid I'm going to hurt my children. Not I'm struggling. Not I need help managing stress. She told trained professionals, people whose job it is to assess risk and intervene, that she feared she would harm her own kids. 5-year-old Namaus, 3-year-old Evelyn. 2 small children who depended on her completely. And their mother was telling anyone who would listen that her mind was fracturing, that something dark was growing inside her, that her babies were in danger. Child Protective Services listened. They investigated. They assessed the situation and came to the conclusion that yes, these children were at risk. So they did what the system is designed to do in cases like this. They removed Namaus and Evelyn from their mother's care, placed them somewhere safe, gave Gardipe time and space to stabilize, to get treatment, to prove she could be the mother they needed. And then, in May of 2021, the system gave them back. Reunification. It's the goal of most CPS interventions. The idea is that families should stay together when possible, that children do best with their biological parents, when those parents can provide safe, stable environments. So caseworkers evaluate progress, check boxes, review treatment plans, and when everything looks good on paper, the kids go home. Namaus and Evelyn went home to their mother, the woman who had explicitly said she feared harming them. Their father, Travis Sandberg, saw what was happening, watched his ex-partner's mental state deteriorate, saw the signs that she was decompensating, that whatever fragile stability she'd achieved was crumbling. And he did what any concerned parent would do, he warned authorities. Not once, repeatedly. He called. He reported. He begged someone to pay attention, to see what he was seeing, to understand that his children were in immediate danger. His warnings were ignored. Maybe caseworkers thought he was overreacting. Maybe they assumed he was a bitter ex trying to cause trouble. Maybe they looked at their checklists and saw that Gardipe had completed her treatment plan, attended her appointments, said the right things in therapy. Maybe they were overworked and underfunded, and drowning in too many cases to give this one the attention it deserved. Whatever the reason, Travis Sandberg's desperate pleas went unanswered. Namaus and Evelyn stayed with their mother. November 19th, 2021. A 911 call comes in. The dispatcher answers, and the voice on the other end is calm. Too calm. Unnaturally calm. I'm reporting a murder. Not I need help. Not something terrible has happened. I'm reporting a murder. Clinical. Detached. Like she's calling to report a broken streetlight or a stray dog. The dispatcher asks questions, tries to get details, and Leannah Gardipe tells them exactly what they'll find when deputies arrive. Officers respond to the Missoula residence. They walk inside, not knowing what to expect, and what they find is every parent's nightmare, every first responder's trauma, every system failure made manifest. Namaus and Evelyn are lying on a bed, side by side, both fully clothed, both with their throats slit, 5 years old and 3 years old, positioned as if they were sleeping, except for the blood and the stillness and the horror of what their mother had done to them. Nearby, a note, handwritten, the words chilling in their delusion. It was the only way that we all wouldn't burn. Now I'm the only one of us that will. She believed she was saving them. In the grip of severe psychosis, Leannah Gardipe had convinced herself that burning, hell, damnation, some incomprehensible torment awaited her children unless she acted. So she took a blade and drew it across their throats. Namaus first, probably. Then Evelyn. Did they understand what was happening? Did they cry? Did they call for their dad? We'll never know. What we do know is that they trusted her. Even at the end, even as she held that blade, they probably thought Mommy would keep them safe. She didn't. The investigation moved quickly. There was no mystery about who killed Namaus and Evelyn. Gardipe had called it in herself, calm as anything, and waited for police to arrive. The question wasn't, who did this, but why, and was she competent to stand trial? Mental health evaluations were ordered. Psychologists and psychiatrists examined her, reviewed her history, assessed her state of mind during the murders. The findings were clear: severe psychosis. Leannah Gardipe was deeply, profoundly, mentally ill. Her grip on reality had been slipping for months, maybe longer. The fears she'd expressed to providers back in late 2020 weren't hypothetical, they were warnings. Red flags waving frantically in the wind. And the system had seen them, responded temporarily, and then sent her children back into the eye of the storm. On August 29, 2023, nearly 2 years after the murders, Gardipe stood in court and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of deliberate homicide. She didn't go to trial. She admitted what she'd done, and on November 20th, the court handed down the sentence. Life without the possibility of release, committed to the custody of Montana's Department of Public Health and Human Services. 2 concurrent life terms in a psychiatric facility. She will never walk free. Never live outside an institution again. For the rest of her life, she'll be locked away, medicated, monitored, contained. It's not a prison in the traditional sense. It's the Montana State Hospital, or a similar facility, where the severely mentally ill are housed and treated. But make no mistake, it's still a cage. She'll never have freedom, never have privacy, never have autonomy. And that's justice, in a way. But it's also an admission that this could have been prevented. Because here's the thing. Leannah Gardipe told people she was dangerous. She self-reported. She reached out for help, and the system responded with temporary intervention followed by reunification. It's policy, it's procedure, it's what caseworkers are trained to do. But policy doesn't account for the depth of someone's psychosis. Procedure doesn't catch the moments when a person is skilled enough to hide their deterioration in front of evaluators. Checklists don't capture the father on the phone saying, "Please, she's not okay, my kids aren't safe." Travis Sandberg did everything right. He co-parented. He stayed involved. He saw the warning signs and reported them. And still, his children were murdered. That's not just a tragedy. It's a system failure of catastrophic proportions. They were removed once. That should have been forever. When CPS takes children out of a home, especially when the mother herself has said, "I fear I'll hurt them," the threshold for return should be extraordinarily high. Not completed a treatment plan, not attended therapy sessions. Not seems stable. It should be sustained, verified, long-term stability with multiple safeguards in place. It should be months, maybe years, of proof that the risk has passed. And in cases involving severe mental illness, especially psychosis, reunification should come with mandatory check-ins, unannounced home visits, ongoing psychiatric oversight. Namaus and Evelyn didn't get that. They got a checklist, and it cost them their lives. Missoula is a college town, relatively progressive, with more resources than much of rural Montana. This didn't happen in some isolated corner of the state, where help was hours away. This happened in a place with hospitals, mental health services, a functioning CPS system. And still, 2 children died because the gap between temporary intervention and sustained safeguards swallowed them whole. Namaus was 5. Old enough for kindergarten. Old enough to have friends, favorite toys, a personality. Maybe he liked dinosaurs or trucks. Maybe he was learning to read. Maybe he asked a million questions and drove his parents crazy in that beautiful, exhausting way kids do. Evelyn was 3. Still a toddler, really. Probably talking in full sentences, developing independence, testing boundaries. They should be in elementary school now. Namaus would be 8, maybe playing soccer or learning an instrument. Evelyn would be 6, losing teeth, bringing home art projects. Instead, they're in graves, side by side, probably, the way their mother left them on that bed. Leannah Gardipe is locked in a psychiatric facility for life. 2 life sentences running concurrently, which means she's serving them at the same time. But the message is clear. 1 life term for Namaus, 1 for Evelyn. 2 children. 2 murders. 2 futures stolen by a mother whose mind betrayed her, and a system that didn't do enough to stop it. Mental illness is real. Psychosis is real. And untreated, unmanaged, it can be deadly. But we knew Gardipe was ill, she told us. Travis told us. The red flags were everywhere. And we, the collective we, the system, the people whose job it is to protect vulnerable children, sent Namaus and Evelyn back anyway. That's the gap. The space between we removed them and we kept them safe. It's where 2 kids fell through, and it's where more will fall if nothing changes. Namaus and Evelyn Sandberg, 5 and 3, murdered by their mother, failed by the system that was supposed to save them. They were removed once. That should have been forever. Case 8. James Alex Hurley, West Yellowstone, 2020. West Yellowstone, Montana. A small tourist town on the edge of Yellowstone National Park, population fewer than 1,500. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where kids ride bikes to school, where neighbors wave. The kind of place where a 12-year-old boy should be safe. James Alex Hurley wasn't safe. Alex's life had already been marked by loss. In 2018, his father died, leaving him without the parent who had been his primary caregiver. The family regrouped, decided on a plan. Alex would move in with his paternal grandparents, Patricia Batts and James Sasser Jr., in their crowded West Yellowstone home. It seemed reasonable. Keep him with family. Give him stability after the trauma of losing his dad. Let his grandparents step in and provide the structure and love he needed. For a while, Alex attended public school. He had teachers, counselors, classmates, mandatory reporters who were trained to spot signs of abuse or neglect. He was visible, part of a system designed to catch kids who were falling through the cracks. Then, in September of 2019, Patricia Batts withdrew Alex from school. She told the district she would be homeschooling him. In Montana, that's all you have to do. Notify the district annually. That's it. No curriculum approval. No testing requirements. No home visits. No oversight. You tell the state you're homeschooling your child, and they take your word for it. Alex disappeared from the classroom, and no one noticed until it was too late. Homeschooling can be a beautiful thing. It can be tailored education, one-on-one attention, flexibility for kids who don't thrive in traditional settings. But it can also be a trap, a way to hide abuse, a method for making a child invisible. When a kid stops showing up to school and the official reason is homeschooling, teachers can't check in, counselors can't pull them aside, coaches and friends and lunch monitors, all the adults who might notice bruises or weight loss or fear in a child's eyes, lose access. The child vanishes into a home, and the only people who see them are the ones who might be hurting them. That's what happened to Alex. For months, behind the closed doors of that West Yellowstone home, Alex Hurley was tortured. Not disciplined, not punished, tortured. The family recorded it. Video evidence later presented in court captured the horror in brutal detail. Forced exercise until his body gave out, beatings with paddles, starvation that left him skeletal, humiliation designed to break his spirit. Over and over, day after day, a 12-year-old boy endured systematic abuse that would make hardened investigators weep. Alex had no escape. No teacher to confide in. No school nurse to notice he'd lost weight. No friend's parent to ask, "Are you okay?" He was homeschooled, which meant he was isolated, and isolation meant no one could save him. On or about February 3rd, 2020, Alex's teenage uncle, James Sasser III, struck him on the back of the head with a wooden paddle. Alex's body, already weakened from months of starvation and abuse, couldn't withstand the blow. He collapsed. His fragile system shut down. He was dying, and the family did nothing. They didn't call 911, didn't rush him to a hospital, didn't even pretend it was an accident and seek help. They watched him die, and then they concealed his death. No medical intervention, no report to authorities. They just hid the fact that a 12-year-old boy had been beaten to death in their home. It took time for the truth to come out. Investigations, interviews, the discovery of video evidence that documented months of torture. When law enforcement finally pieced together what had happened, the scale of the abuse was so staggering that even seasoned detectives struggled to process it. This wasn't a single act of violence. This wasn't a moment of lost control. This was sustained, deliberate, calculated torture of a child who had nowhere to run. Because the crime occurred within the jurisdiction covered by the Major Crimes Act, the case went federal. Patricia Batts, Alex's grandmother, the woman who withdrew him from school, who should have been his protector, stood trial for his murder. In May of 2023, she pleaded guilty to deliberate homicide, child endangerment, and tampering with evidence. On August 22nd, the court sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will die behind bars. She will never walk free. And even that doesn't feel like enough. James Sasser Jr., Alex's grandfather, was sentenced in March of 2022 to 100 years in prison. He's not eligible for parole. He'll spend the rest of his life locked up for the role he played in torturing and concealing the death of his grandson. The teenage uncle, James Sasser III, was sentenced as a juvenile. He received confinement until age 18, followed by probation. He's out now, living somewhere, free, while Alex is in a grave. Let's talk about Montana's homeschool laws, or rather, the lack of them. When you withdraw a child from public school to homeschool, you notify the district once a year. That's the entire requirement. You don't have to prove you're teaching anything. You don't have to submit to testing or evaluations. No one comes to your home to make sure the child is safe, fed, educated, alive. The state just trusts that you're doing what you said you'd do. For most families, that trust is warranted. The vast majority of homeschooling parents are dedicated, capable, and genuinely invested in their children's education. But for families like the Batts-Sasser household, that lack of oversight creates a perfect environment for abuse. Pull the kid out of school, cut off access to mandatory reporters, isolate them completely, and then do whatever you want behind closed doors. No one's checking. No one's watching. Alex Hurley became an invisible child the moment his grandmother filed that homeschool notification. He vanished from every system designed to protect him, and by the time anyone realized something was wrong, he was already dead. Other states have caught on to this danger. Some require annual testing or portfolio reviews. Some mandate that homeschooled children meet periodically with educational evaluators. Some have registries that track which kids are being homeschooled and trigger welfare checks if there's prior CPS involvement. Montana has none of that. A single notification, once a year, and the child disappears from view. How many kids are out there right now, withdrawn from school under the guise of homeschooling, suffering in silence? How many are isolated, abused, starving, invisible? We don't know, because no one's checking. Alex Hurley was 12 years old. Old enough to know what was happening to him. Old enough to understand that he was trapped, that no help was coming, that every day was going to bring more pain. 12-year-olds are still kids, but they're not little. They have fully formed thoughts, fears, hopes. Alex knew he was being tortured. He knew his family had turned against him, and he knew no one was coming to save him, because no one even knew he existed anymore. The video evidence shown in court, hours of footage documenting his abuse, paints a picture so disturbing that even hardened prosecutors had trouble watching it. Forced exercise until he collapsed from exhaustion. Paddle beatings that left him bruised and broken. Starvation that turned a growing boy into a skeletal ghost. Humiliation meant to strip away his dignity, his sense of self, his will to resist. And through it all, the family kept recording, kept documenting their own cruelty, maybe as a way to control him, behave or will show people, maybe as some sick form of entertainment. Whatever the reason, those videos became the evidence that convicted them. West Yellowstone is a gateway community. Tourists pass through by the thousands every year on their way to see geysers and bison and pristine wilderness. It's beautiful, idyllic, the kind of place people dream about visiting. And just blocks away from those tourist shops and lodges, a 12-year-old boy was being tortured to death, while the state of Montana had no idea he even existed. Alex's father died in 2018. He couldn't protect his son, but the system could have, should have. If Montana required even minimal oversight of homeschooled children, annual in-person meetings, standardized testing, welfare checks for families with prior CPS involvement, Alex would have been seen. Someone would have noticed the weight loss, the bruises, the fear. Someone would have asked questions. Someone would have intervened. But Montana doesn't require that. So Alex disappeared from a classroom in September of 2019, and by February of 2020, he was dead. 5 months. That's how long it took for a 12-year-old to be tortured to death in plain sight, hidden only by a homeschool notification and a state that didn't bother to check. Patricia Batts is in prison for life. James Sasser Jr. is serving a century. The teenage uncle served his juvenile sentence and walked free. And somewhere in Montana, there's a grave with Alex Hurley's name on it. 12 years old, vanished from school, tortured for months, killed by his own family, failed by a system that valued parental rights over child safety. Every teacher who ever had Alex in class probably wonders where he is now. Every classmate who knew him might think he moved away, started over somewhere else, maybe even thrived. They don't know he's dead. They don't know he spent his final months in agony. They don't know that the moment he was withdrawn to be homeschooled, his fate was sealed. Alex disappeared from a classroom, and no one noticed until it was too late. 8 cases, 8 dead children, 8 mothers who will never taste freedom again. But these stories share more than just their horrific endings. They share patterns, threads that weave through every case, warnings that went unheeded, systems that failed at critical moments. Substance abuse runs through these tragedies like poison in groundwater, alcohol on the Crow Reservation, methamphetamine on Fort Peck, impairment behind the wheel, impairment in decision-making, impairment that turned maternal instinct into lethal violence. Then there's untreated mental illness, psychosis warping maternal capacity in Billings and Missoula, minds fracturing while children paid the price. Montana's geographic isolation amplifies every failure. Vast distances delay response times. Resources stretch thin across endless prairie and mountain ranges. Prior warnings were ignored in case after case. Grandfathers who said this will kill him. Fathers who begged for welfare checks. Mothers who told providers, "I fear I'll hurt my kids." How many red flags does it take? Jurisdictional complexity on tribal lands creates gaps where children fall through. Homeschool laws turn kids invisible, erasing them from every system designed to protect them. And the victims themselves, infants, toddlers, disabled children, are the most vulnerable, non-verbal, dependent, easily hidden. Montana's Department of Public Health and Human Services reviews confirm it. Most child fatalities involve families with prior contact. Substance abuse is constant. The red flags were always there. These weren't isolated tragedies. They were preventable catastrophes. So what changes? Everything. Mandate documented welfare checks for every high-risk call, no exceptions, no delays. Deploy mobile crisis teams trained in mental illness and parenting emergencies. Overhaul CPS reunification standards. Infants, disabled children, and those with prior injuries need prolonged, verified stability before return, not checklists, but proof. Institute periodic safety visits for homeschooled children, especially those with CPS history. Build tribal state-federal coordination with shared databases, so no child slips between jurisdictions. Implement hot car prevention technology, daycare callback systems, probation conditions banning unattended vehicles. Montana's vast horizons shouldn't hide horrors. 8 names demand more than grief. They demand action. They demand change. And they demand we never look away again. James Many White Horses, Tennielle Big Day, Rosanna Fox, Caleb Hopkins, Ezekiel Contreras, Kenzley Olson, Namaus and Evelyn Sandberg, James Alex Hurley. 8 names, 8 faces, 8 chances Montana failed to take. These children didn't die because evil is inevitable. They died because systems broke, warnings were ignored, and protection came too late or not at all. Every single one of these tragedies was preventable. Every single one should haunt us into action. If you believe their names deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't let their stories fade into silence. Drop a comment below. Which case shook you most? What change would you demand if you had the power? Let's keep this conversation going, because silence is complicity. And if this documentary made you feel something, anger, grief, determination, hit that like button. Let the algorithm know these stories matter. James, Tennielle, Rosanna, Caleb, Ezekiel, Kenzley, Namaus, Evelyn, Alex. Their deaths demand more than sorrow. They demand change. And change starts with people like you refusing to look away.